Alrighty.
Okay, so Mary?
Rona Solomon will open our racial justice Seder with a dedication to a Staten Island civil rights icon. There is a link to his story in the chat box.
We dedicate today's Racial Justice Seder to the memory of Richard Prideaux, a 1960s force for racial equity on Staten Island, the founder of the Staten Island chapter of CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality. When John and I moved here and became involved in the Staten Island resistance, he was still a very active presence. He was a labor unionist and a former member of the Unitarian Church of Staten Island. As his daughter Barbara described him, he was never angry, he never yelled or cursed. He was a well-balanced man who was motivated to make change by curbing the racism that was often embedded deep beneath the streets of Staten Island.
We come together this morning to celebrate liberation from the chains of oppression. Let us recall the struggles of all people in every generation, in every part of the world. Let us strengthen ourselves and join the fight against injustice wherever it exists. For as long as one person is oppressed, we are all oppressed. The book we read from is called the Haggadah, which in Hebrew means the telling.
At each of our tables, let us light our candles together. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel yom tov. Blessed is the spirit of freedom in whose honor we kindle the lights of this holiday Passover, the season of freedom.
Nima,
Yeah,
You're on.
you're up.
I'm sorry, I'm having problems with my script. It's not loading.
Oh,
So if somebody else wants to take it, that's fine.
okay. Yizkor, we remember. Even as we give thanks for the gift of being together at this time, we take a moment of silence in memory of all those we have lost in the past year since we last sat at the Passover table together. They may be family or personal loved ones. They may be people who were killed by state-sponsored violence. They may be people who died for the cause of liberation. Among the more than 1.5 million people in the US and more than 2.5 million worldwide, we mourn the loss of these members of our congregation. Their loss to COVID-19. Levister Tompkins, Richard Curry, and Harvey Rosenspit.
A blessing to mark the purpose of our gathering, to strengthen our commitment to pursue racial justice together. I read from Martin Luther King Jr.'s letter from Birmingham jail, April 16, 1963. I am cognizant of the interrelatedness of all communities and states. I cannot sit idly by in Atlanta and not be concerned about what happens in Birmingham. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotov, v'tzivanu lirdof tzedek. Blessed is the source who shows us paths to holiness and commands us to pursue justice.
All Jewish participants
Yes, you're on
all
Kaddish.
Jewish participants, from holidays to weddings, include wine as a symbol of our joy. Traditionally, we drink 4 cups of wine, which serve as signposts for our Seder. Tonight, we will drink just one as we learn and take action. We raise our cup honestly about the present moment. Can we open up the pain and anger in our country and our city today? Are we ready to be honest with ourselves? What are we bringing to the conversation today? What do we want to take away from the Seder?
Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri hagafen. Blessed is the eternal, determiner of the universe, who creates the fruit of the vine. L'chaim.
Zip.
Nima, do you have your script up for the Seder plate?
It's not downloading. I'm having problems with it.
Rona,
Can
would you
you-
like to read this one?
Okie doke.
The
A
Seder plate.
traditional Seder plate would have zroa, a roasted shank bone signifying the sacrifice of the Paschal lamb, betza, an egg signifying the rebirth of freedom, maror, the bitter herb, which reminds us of the bitterness of slavery, karoset, a mixture of nuts and fruit, signifying the mortar used by slaves, karpas, a fresh vegetable, a symbol of spring, chazeret, a second kind of bitter herb. And although our Seder plate has many of the usual ritual foods, we've substituted a beet instead of a shank bone and added a non-traditional symbol, an orange. The orange is a symbol of inclusion of lesbians and gays, women, and others who've been marginalized within our communities. The idea of using an orange in this way was conceived by the Jewish scholar Susanna Eschel. This symbol expresses our yearning to be free in ways which may be more relevant to us now in the 21st century.
The Passover pine cone, putting prisons on the Seder plate. We pass over pine cones every day. Inside each of these pine cones is among the most precious of all nuts, the pine nut. Most of us pass more pine nuts in a single day than one could count in a year. Yet they remain hidden, unseen. Moreover, they're nearly impossible to extract with our own hands. The pine cone imprisons its seeds, and only hard work on the part of nature compels it to open up. The cones of fire pines, for instance, are glued shut by resin, and only a raging fire can force the cone to release its seeds. Thus, these seeds, the glorious pine nuts all around us, remain out of sight, out of mind. We pass over prisons every day as well, and so rarely do we ever see what is inside. Inside US prisons are approximately 25% of all prisoners in the world, despite that our country amounts to a mere 5% of the global population, according to the US Census Bureau and International Center for Prison Studies. People of color constitute approximately 67% of the incarcerated, even though they make up less than 37% of the US population. Black men are imprisoned at more than 6 times the rate of white men, according to sentencingproject.org. Through inhumane, excessive, punitive laws, unfettered institutional racism, and widespread ignorance and apathy, our system of laws and justice has lost its way. We have recidivated back into Egypt. Therefore, this year, we add a pine cone to our Seder plate as a reminder of mass incarceration and the work it will take to repair this injustice.
Nima, how did you make out with that download?
It's not working. I mean,
All right.
I just
So-
continuously. So if somebody wants to take over my parts,
So-
that's fine.
Sarah, want to take it? Because you're going to continue on after.
Okay, hats. Washing hands before eating a green vegetable.
Mhm.
Imagine there is a bowl of water, a cup, and a towel near your table. As we help each other to wash our hands, we reflect on the mutual dependence that water creates. We commit to work for justice with others rather than in isolation. Carpus, eating a piece of parsley dipped in salt water. A small piece of parsley dipped into salt water and eaten after reciting the blessing over vegetables. Dipping the carpus is a sign of luxury and freedom, reminding us of potential and promise, and the salt water reminding us of the tears and the pain along the way. This year, may it also represent tears of Black parents and families mourning the loss of their children at the hands of police brutality. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, borei pri ha'adama. Blessed is the one who sustains all life and brings forth fruits from the earth. Yachatz, breaking the middle matzah. Systems of oppression break our world in so many ways, large and small. They shatter bodies, families, communities, sometimes whole nations. Rarely do we stop to contemplate our own complicity in systems that wreak havoc in our name. As we break the matzah now, what are we willing to do about it? And where might we start? What is broken can never be what it once was. We tell a story from our broken community. The story of the attack upon the home of Doral Charles and her family by Staten Island neighbors is excerpted from the autobiography of my husband, Professor David Traballet.
In April 1972 occurred an event that disturbed me greatly and made me more assertive in the life of our college. When I read the Staten Island Advance and saw a picture and story that a Trinidadian family's home had been firebombed, I was furious. When I read that it was the Charles family, it made me even angrier. The wife of the owner of the house was Jarrell Charles, who was my student and my friend. Her husband, Nip, played soccer for Trinidad. Authorities suspected that arsonists started the blaze early on a Saturday morning before the Charles family was to move in. In many ways, the event represented the conservative tendency of the people of Staten Island. When the men who threw the bombs were caught, they said they were not racist, but were only thinking that their homes would lose value if a Black family moved into their New Dorp neighborhood. The president of CSI wrote to the mayor and totally supported the family. However, another area of support came from a very unlikely source. In a silent plea for brotherhood, some 400 high school girls from St. Joseph by the Sea quietly marched 4.5 miles down Highland Boulevard to the burned out Charles home. A soggy American flag that the sun had retrieved from the fire drooped from a wooden stick among some shrubs as the girls, who were mostly white, formed a semicircle in front of the house and broke their silence by reciting the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. Lord, make me an instrument of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is doubt, faith. Before they could complete the last 2 lines of the prayer, a few white women who were standing across the street derided and made fun of the girls, but they finished anyway. For it is giving that we receive. It is in pardoning that we are pardoned. One of the girls was Mrs. Charles' daughter. The house had been singled out for attacks by cowardly bigots ever since Mr. Charles, who said the police were unresponsive, took title to it. They left Staten Island and moved back to Trinidad, where Jarrell Charles completed her doctorate in sociology at the University of the West Indies.
I was born by the river in a little town. Oh, and just like that river, I've been running ever since. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. It's been too hard living, but I'm afraid to die, 'cause I don't know what's up there beyond the sky. It's been a long time coming, but I know a change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. I go to the movie and I go downtown. hang around. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gonna come. Oh, yes it will. Then I go to my brother and I say, brother, help me please. But it winds up knocking me back down on my knees. Oh, there were times when I thought I couldn't last too long, but now I think I'm able to carry on. It's been a long time coming, but I know change gonna come. Oh, yes it will.
The 4 questions. What questions must we ask today? Our first 3 questions and their answers are drawn from Michelle Alexander's groundbreaking book, The New Jim Crow: Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness, published in 2010. Question number 1. Why does America have the highest incarceration rate of any developed nation in the world? Many factors have increased the incarceration rate, including the war on drugs, the imposition of mandatory minimum sentencing, and privatization of prisons, which creates financial incentives for keeping people in prison.
The impact of the drug war has been astounding. In less than 30 years, the US penal population exploded from around 300,000 to more than 2 million, with drug convictions accounting for the majority of the increase. The United States now by far has the highest incarceration rate in the world. Drug crime was declining, not rising, when a drug war was declared in 1972. From a historical perspective, however, the lack of correlation between crime and punishment is nothing new. Sociologists have frequently observed that governments use punishment primarily as a tool of social control, and thus the extent or severity of punishment is often unrelated to actual crime patterns.
Question number 2. Who is being locked up in the United States?
No other country in the world imprisons so many of its racial or ethnic minorities. The United States imprisons a larger percentage of its Black population than South Africa did at the height of apartheid. In Washington, D.C., our nation's capital, it is estimated that 3 out of 4 young Black men and nearly all those in the poorest neighborhoods can expect to serve time in prison. Rates of incarceration found in Black communities across America. These stark racial disparities cannot be explained by rates of drug crime. Studies show that people of all colors use and sell illegal drugs at remarkably similar rates. This is not what one would guess, however, when entering our nation's prisons and jails, which are overflowing with Black and brown drug offenders. New Jim Crow, page 6.
Michelle Alexander describes an experience of harsh treatment in the criminal justice system.
Imagine you are Emma Faye Stewart, a 30-year-old single African-American mother of 2 who was arrested as part of a drug sweep in Hearne, Texas. All but one of those people arrested were African-American. You are innocent. After a week in jail, you have no one to care for your 2 small children and are eager to get home. Your court-appointed attorney urges you to plead guilty to a drug distribution charge, saying that the prosecutor has offered probation. You refuse, steadfastly proclaiming your innocence. Finally, after almost a month in jail, you decide to plead guilty so you can return home to your children. Unwilling to risk a trial and years of imprisonment, you are sentenced to 10 years probation in order to pay $1,000 in fines, as well as court and probation costs. You are also now branded a drug felon. You are no longer eligible for food stamps. You may be discriminated against in employment. You cannot vote for at least 12 years. And you are about to be evicted from public housing. Once homeless, your children will be taken away from you and put in foster care. A judge eventually dismisses all cases against the defendants who did not plead guilty. At trial, the judge finds that the entire suite was based on the testimony of a single informant who lied to the prosecution. You, however, are still a drug felon, homeless, and desperate to regain custody of your children.
Question number 3. Why are so many African Americans, as well as other people of color, being treated like criminals?
Slavery defined what it meant to be Black, a slave, and Jim Crow defined what it meant to be Black, a second-class citizen. Today, mass incarceration defines the meaning of Blackness in America. Black people, especially Black men, are criminals. That is what it means to be Black. The temptation is to insist that Black men choose to be criminals. The system does not make them criminals, at least not in the way that slavery makes Black slaves or Jim Crow made them second-class citizens. The myth of choice here is seductive, but it should be resisted. African Americans are not significantly more likely to use or sell prohibited drugs than whites, but they are made criminals at drastically higher rates for precisely the same conduct. In fact, studies suggest that white professionals may be most likely of any group to have engaged in illegal drug activity in their lifetime, yet they are the least likely to be made criminals. Black people have been made criminals by the war on drugs to a degree that dwarfs its effects on other racial and ethnic groups, especially whites. And the process of making them criminals has produced racial stigma. New Jim Crow, pages 196 to 197.
Question number 4. Why do we, as Jews and friends of Jews, ask these questions at this Seder?
We cried out to the Eternal One, the God of our ancestors, who heard our plea and saw our plight, our misery, and our oppression. There are Jews of color who have personal stories about experiencing racism. There are Jews of all colors who have personal stories to tell about incarceration and the criminal justice system. But the issue affects us all, whether or not we have personal stories to tell. As a people of the Exodus, we are called to witness the suffering of our neighbors, to open our eyes and to cry out in the name of justice. Then the Eternal One freed us from Egypt by a mighty hand, by an outstretched arm and awesome power, and signs and portents, dismantling the system of mass incarceration and creating a system of justice and dignity for all Americans, calls for wisdom, perseverance, hard work, and faith. We must raise our voices and build alliances. We pray for the ability to see clearly, to act with compassion, and to forgive ourselves for the ways we have unknowingly been agents of oppression. We pray for courage, guidance, and strength as we celebrate Passover, our festival of freedom.
I'm so sorry about that.
Yeah, you gotta switch. Should we skip that song, Mary?
Can you hear it?
Well, you better listen, my
Yes,
sisters
yes.
and brothers. For if you do, you can hear there are voices still calling us falsely. And they're all crying across the ocean, and they're crying across the land, and they will till we all come to understand. None of us are free. None of us are free. None of us are free. If one of us is chained, none of us are free. There are people still in darkness, and they just can't see the light. If you don't say it's wrong, then that says it's right. We gotta try to feel each other, let our brothers know that we care. Get the message, send it out loud and clear. None of us are free. None of us are free. None of us are free. One of us is chained. None of us are free. It's a simple truth that we all need just to hear and just to see. None of us are free. One of us is chained. None of us are free. Now I swear your salvation isn't too hard to find. None of us can find it on our own. We've got to join together in spirit, heart, and mind, so that every soul who's suffering will know they're not alone. None of us are free. None of us are free. None of us are free. If one of us is chained, none of us are free. If you just look around you, you're gonna see what I said. For the world is getting smaller each passing day. Now it's time to start making changes, and it's time for us to realize that the truth is shining bright right before our eyes. None of us are free. None of us are free. None of us are free. If one of us is chained, none of us are free. 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 If one of us is chained, none of us are free.
The 10 plagues. The original 10 plagues were afflicted upon the Egyptians by God to bring about the end of slavery. What follows is a list of modern plagues bequeathed to humankind by humans. Before we drink to our liberation, we mark how the suffering diminishes our joy by taking a drop of wine out of our cup of joy for each of the 10 plagues. And as we call out the names of the plagues, we remove 10 drops from our overflowing cups with our fingers. These are our 10 modern plagues. Lack of universal education. The existing educational system is not equitable for all. Those most vulnerable in society are relegated to a secondary status by inadequate funding and a lack of resources. Therefore, elitist notions of privilege and entitlement are curtailing access to education. Today, we affirm that all people are entitled to the best education that society can provide. Rona, can you step in here? Unmute yourself.
Okay. Basic human needs are not met. Oops. In this land of technological innovation and abundance, the poor and disenfranchised, those with no voice, are left to fend for themselves. Basic needs such as adequate clothing and shelter and nutritious food are inaccessible to many members of our society. Today, we affirm that even the poorest among us deserve both dignity and fulfillment of basic human needs.
Poisoning our earth. We have polluted our environment instead of protecting it. Today, we affirm that the air we breathe, the water we drink, the food we eat, the good earth around us, all of these should be humanity's common heritage.
Denial of human rights. Existing oppressive systems and conditions dehumanize all of us, denying our past and heritage, constraining who we are, and curtailing the opportunity to reach our full potential. Today, we affirm that freedom is the birthright of all God's children. Disease. Rona.
Disease. We live in a world where curable diseases spread unhindered across communities, nations, and continents. Today, we affirm our responsibility to prevent and eliminate curable diseases wherever they occur.
Extremes of poverty and wealth. Wealth is gathered by some solely for the purpose of material gain, creating extremes of poverty and obscene accumulations of wealth. Today, we affirm that we are, in fact, our sisters and brothers' keeper.
Societal intolerance. Prejudice and discrimination are arbitrarily heaped upon those labeled as different.
Violence. Psychological, emotional, spiritual, and physical is its legacy. Today, we affirm the beauty of our diversity.
Ravages of war, death, destruction, and genocide continue to plague humanity all over the earth. Today, we affirm our ability to coexist in a world of peace.
Natural and man-made disasters. Earthquakes, tsunamis, hurricanes, tornadoes, and other acts of nature compounded by human error or greed have wreaked massive destruction around the world. Today, we affirm that we will not ignore the plight of those whose lives have been shattered, but will open our hearts and extend our hands in friendship and compassion.
Really, what is lake water? will now bless the matzah, the bread of affliction. And as we bless it and eat it, we dedicate ourselves to fighting oppression in all its forms, so that never again shall anyone have to eat this bread of affliction, even as we understand so many currently suffer.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, motzi lechem min haaretz. Blessed is our God, determiner of the universe, who brings forth bread from the earth. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshanu b'mitzvotav, tzavanu al achilat matzah. Blessed is our God, determiner of the universe, who has made us holy through commandments and has commanded us to eat unleavened bread.
Maror, eating the bitter herbs. I read this quote from James Baldwin. You think your pain and your heartbreak are unprecedented in the history of the world, and then you read. It was books that taught me that things that tormented me the most were the very things that connected me with all the people who were alive and who had ever been alive. As we eat the bitter herb, we acknowledge that no one people have monopoly on pain and oppression. The only way to liberation is to educate ourselves about the struggles of the past and to learn that our pain is ultimately inseparable from the oppression experienced by all people.
The Trail of Tears. This brief history of the Trail of Tears was excerpted from the website of the Cherokee Historical Association. The Trail of Tears was the forced and brutal relocation of approximately 100,000 indigenous people belonging to the Cherokee, Creek, Chickasaw, Choctaw, and Seminole, among other nations, living between Michigan, Louisiana, and Florida, to land west of the Mississippi River. Motivated by gold and land, Congress, under President Andrew Jackson, passed the Indian Removal Act by a slim and controversial margin in 1830. The Cherokees resisted removal through every possible means. In 1835, the Treaty of New Echota, which was signed by a minority of the Cherokees, would give Cherokees land west of the Mississippi to the US in exchange for $5 million. In 1836, the US Congress ratified the treaty by one vote in the Senate and gave Cherokees 2 years to remove themselves. Meanwhile, the US Army began constructing stockades in preparation for the removal, which would become known as the Trail of Tears. The Cherokee Nation rejected the Treaty of New Echota. As a result, between May 1838 and March 1839, federal soldiers and state militia rounded up 16,000 Cherokees from Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, and North Carolina, taking them to stockades and then forcing them to march to Indian Territory, present-day Oklahoma. At least 4,000 Cherokees died, 1/4 of the population, and many were buried in unmarked graves. One group of Cherokees, the Okanalufti Citizen Nations, remained in North Carolina. 60 families, led by Yonaguska, Long Blanket, and Wilnota, had land in their own names under the treaties of 1817 and 1819. They lived sober, industrious lives and were able to successfully appeal to the North Carolina legislature to remain on their lands, mostly near the Okanalufti River. During removal, 300 to 400 Cherokees hid in the wooded mountains of Western North Carolina. Altogether, about 1,000 Cherokees, including those who stayed in the mountains or made their way back from the Trail of Tears, became the ancestors of today's Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. Today, the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians is a sovereign nation with over 14,000 members.
Unmute yourself.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu al achilat maror. Blessed is our God, determiner of the universe, who has made us holy through commandments and has commanded us to eat the bitter herbs. Now let us in silence and mindfulness taste the bitter herbs. This is horosis, a sweet paste that represents the mortar the Israelites made by hand when they were enslaved. It is sweet because even when we're enslaved, we are not without our humanity. We can find moments of creativity and sweetness. We eat the horosis to recognize the many cultural contributions enslaved people have given to the future generations. Now, please dip a piece of matzah in the apple paste, the horosis, and eat it.
Leonard Peltier and creativity in prison. In a maximum security prison in Coleman, Florida, a 71-year-old native man sits at an easel painting. His back hurts so much, it's hard for him to walk. He needs someone to help support him for the first few steps. Squinting through reading glasses, he carefully applies paint to the canvas and slowly pictures of Lakota warriors and elders and scenes from his people's history come to life. The artist's name is Leonard Peltier, and in his mind, the paintings are a door to the outside world, the world of free men, into which his creativity can escape from nearly 40 years of incarceration. Native American activist Leonard Peltier has spent over 40 years in prison for a crime he did not commit. Prosecutors and federal agents manufactured evidence against him, including the so-called murder weapon, hid proof of his innocence, presented false testimony obtained through torturous interrogation techniques, ignored court orders, and lied to the jury. People are commonly set free due to a single constitutional violation. But Peltier, innocent and faced with a staggering number of constitutional violations, has yet to receive equal justice. This is a ballad of Leonard Peltier, which I wrote in his honor. The tall grasses of the prairies hold the blood spilled by the invading white man who killed the buffalo and everything. The glory days of the indigenous, thundering hooves like thundering clouds, vanishing into thin air, what is left of these people. They were doused with fire water. They were doused with disease blankets. They were doused with Christianity. They were left with nothing. The great emancipator, even he, executed 37 Dakota the day after Christmas, December 1862, their bodies hanging like drying tobacco. Are there no great warriors left to fight the land-grabbing Washichu? Ah, yes, there is still one fighting, the last warrior, Leonard Peltier. He languishes in prison. We on the outside can hear his cry, the last warrior who carries the torch like a crazy horse and Sitting Bull. He has the truth on his side, the defender of his people. When the white father invaded Wounded Knee again, pitting half-breeds and full-bloods against each other. So many years gone by, the last warrior bides his time, painting, leading, influencing, hoping for compassion from Washington, but none comes. The FBI will see to it. No executive pardons. No paroles come his way. We pray for his release. The last warrior of the Lakota. Mutakie Oyashine, which by the way is a Lakota, which means we are all related.
Eating the afikomen. We now take the matzah we broke earlier in the Seder and reunite the two pieces. In so doing, we affirm that while the brokenness caused by systems of oppression cannot be undone, it can be repaired. Many May this symbolic act inspire us to dismantle the oppressive systems that shatter lives and fracture communities. This Passover, let us commit to sacred struggle, to bring down the pharaohs of our day, to find true liberation, to enter the promised land that is promised to all.
Nodeh lein hachaim, berech the grace after meals. Hazna et hakol, haaretz hatova, bahar chava, nishmor na vehi, v'keimenu, unfalkeesh mazon lahaspi abo. Hoyosh ve teyevo. Let us acknowledge the sources of light, source of all nourishment. May we protect the bountiful earth that it may continue to sustain us. And let us seek sustenance for all who dwell in the world.
The cup of Elijah. As we open the door for the prophet Elijah, Ray Barash Pagans asks us to love and support the stranger, the beggar, and the familial in our struggle for collective liberation, and to recognize that these three peoples are often one and the same. We come as community in our most vulnerable moments to support our mourners. As Black folks, we have come to the street, to the courthouse, to the town square to demand justice. Our demands for justice are a communal act to love and support one another, a communal act to remember those who have been taken from us. We have no Kaddish, no framework of remembrance. We have hashtags, freedom songs, and protest chants.
When Israel was in Egypt's land, let my people go. Oppressed so hard they could not stand. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. So spoke the Lord, old Moses said, let my people go. If not, I'll strike your firstborn dead. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. No more shall they in bondage toil. Let my people go. But let them come out with Egypt's spoil. Let my people go. Go down, go down, away down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go. You did not always reap and more. Let my people go. And wear those slavery chains for long. Let my people go. Go down, Moses, way down in Egypt's land. Tell old Pharaoh to let my people go.
Nerdsa, conclusion. Go Down Moses is a Negro spiritual originally sung by enslaved Africans in the American South. It describes the Exodus story, and so it has become common for Jews to sing it during the Seder. As we use the beautiful songs of Black people to enrich these Jewish traditions, we reflect on what it means to sing a song of freedom when so many are not free. Black people in the United States continue to suffer from oppression. And when Black people are not physically, and while Black people are not physically enslaved, as during the dark part of our nation's history, they still suffer from education inequality, mass incarceration, police brutality, and other forms of both blatant and subtle racism. Do we all truly know that Black lives matter? Just as during the Exodus story, many of us have the courage to stand with Black people and ensure that everyone knows and believes that Black lives matter. Just as the Israelites did not turn back from the Red Sea, we must not turn back from the enormous challenges that are wounding and killing Black people in the United States. We too must join hands and face the challenges through faith and fellowship. We shall overcome. Let us say together, this year,
This year, may
may we
we
work for justice and liberation for all
Black people here
in our homes, our city,
our city,
our
our
county,
county,
our state,
our state,
our
our
country.
country,
World.
and our world.
We promise to each other,
To each other.
we are
We are
cultivating
cultivating
hope
hope
in our
in our
hearts.
hearts.
We are
We are
building
building understanding
and
and
connection
connection
between people.
between people.
We are working for
Working
the vision of
Vision
racial
of racial justice, economic justice,
civil rights,
rights,
Democracy.
and
and
democracy,
democracy,
And human rights.
and
human
human
rights
rights for all.
for all.
The Passover Seder ends with a statement of hope. L'shana haba b'Yerushalayim. Next year in a redeemed Jerusalem. The ancient phrase expresses our longing for a perfected world. May it come for our region, our country, and our world speedily and in our days. We conclude our Seder with thanks for our food, for our community, and for this work.
But before we go to coffee hour, let's take a moment to take an offering to support our beloved church. It is the many gifts of our congregation that keep our services and our activities going, especially in this time of coronavirus. It has kept us going together for the past year. You'll find the pertinent information in the chat box. We gratefully accept whatever you can donate, however great or small. And now we invite you to join us for virtual coffee hour.